Welcome to Park Towne Place, Museum District residents. We are pleased to share with you our nationally recognized and award-winning art program. Situated on Benjamin Franklin Parkway, the complex is uniquely positioned among Philadelphia's most treasured art and cultural institutions. A major redevelopment a few years ago gave us the opportunity to turn our historic property with soaring lobbies and lush grounds into an art showcase for artists from Philadelphia, the region, and around the world. We now boast more than 150 pieces in our permanent art collection. And temporary rotational exhibitions, artist talks, classes, and workshops are now free and open to the public. What started out as an amenity for our residents is now our gift to Philadelphia for all to enjoy. At Air Communities, our mantra is building communities. It's a part of our DNA. We strive to be outstanding partners and corporate citizens in Philadelphia and throughout the country. We hope you will be inspired and delighted by the art, the environment, and the passion that we and the artists have for Park Towne Place. Come visit us.
My work is about memory and history, and I a lot of times create architectural work to talk about history and memory. So these are two installations about Park Towne Place, and I love the mid-century moment that they represent. I want people to really always be kind of aware of their actual body in an actual space that has a lot of meaning and history, and I want my work to have a conversation with them about that. It's like a self-reflexivity. You are actually in a place physically, but your mind creates what that space means, right? I could tell you something about this space and it would totally change how you feel about how you are at a particular moment. Linger, the reason I titled them Linger is because I wanted to talk about how our ideas of place and history kind of linger with us. Their memory, they stick with us. And I think my work is super melancholy. There's a lot of nostalgia for and glorifying, the past. So Linger let me wander around a lot of those kinds of ideas of what lasted and what didn't last, what's here and what's not here, and kind of let you kind of think about that in that kind of melancholy space that I think Linger does. Our humanity links us to the people who were here before us. We should be thinking about that. We're all connected. And that's when you're curious about where you are and who was here before and what's their story and how narrative, knowing other people's narrative helps me build my narrative. It's all stories that we tell each other.
Maps are so great. You instantly place yourself somewhere within the work, right? So you approach this thing and you have a hook, you have a way in that you don't need any a priori knowledge of critical theory or, This is a piece I made about 22 years ago called Heaven. It is 3 interconnecting rings made out of wood that have plastic carved buildings glued on the interior of 2 of the rings, the 2 vertical rings, and the horizontal ring is a ring of gardens. What happens if the entire city is visible to you became an interesting question for me. I have 2 other pieces in the show. One is called Atopia. It's in the same vein of exploring architecture as organism. What does an organism have? It has an inside and an outside. It has these walls around it. The other piece that I have in the show is mapping a pattern language. It stems from a more recent effort on my part to start returning to writing and to poetry and try to connect it to drawing in some way. And so I'm kind of working for a project right now that uses this book called A Pattern Language to map novelistic space. Mapping is such a great metaphor for understanding our, how we move through the world. We don't know who we are until we know what's around us. That's baked into the experience of art, is that you step out of yourself, and then hopefully with that experience you get to turn around and look back.
The paintings in this show are from groups of work that came after a period where I was doing more, how do I make an image that conceptualizes me moving through space? So those, in a kind of really vague way or general way, those bodies of work were about lines and trajectories. And then after that, I sort of thought I wanted to do things that were about location. When those angular lines are coming in, or when a shape is falling out, or I'm dealing with this kind of, you're in there and you're outside of it. There's other kind of sort of mental constructs or ways in which it's difficult to attend. We bring a lot of concepts too. We're very sort of mentally oriented rather than bodily oriented, one might say. So I think my work tries to be both about like that memory of my body being in that space, but also about the kind of complexities of lived experience in a digital age. So that's where the physicality, but also this kind of disrupting of the reference point, disrupting of the location. The way that I build the image is about sort of referring to the reference and disrupting the reference. They're not always easy for you to specifically locate yourself. Well, I've created a lot of techniques for modulating opacity and translucency and building kind of tension in the visual image between what's opaque and what's translucent. So how light is being absorbed and how light is being reflected. Underneath all of these moves that I'm making was an experience of space. And I think I'm really interested in the ways in which our concepts of visual organization relate to our concepts of organizing ourselves when we're actually out experiencing. So when does the painted image fold into real experience of moving and locating and thinking while being out and about? So if I could bring you inside the work, I want to do that. I want you to be seduced by them. But at the same time, I want you to then maybe if you walk outside and somehow see something different in the world around you that has nothing to do with being inside a painting, then maybe I've done my job.
I always mix the concept of the city and the place. Here we have the Brandywine River Museum, and is the idea of this very bucolic place in dialogue with a very stately mansion that is in Philadelphia. For me, working with cities is to reflect what is seen and what is not seen, and establish the dialogue between different images, buildings, parts of the city, living environments. The ones that they have lights, they tend to be able to be turned on and off, and that is to bring what is invisible into the light. I have done that many times. I now use also mirrors. The mirrors allow the viewer to be part of the image. When you get close to it, you will see yourself. So my work incorporates different techniques to make you feel part of this environment. You make the place and the place makes you. This piece, I call it Nature's Chapel, and it's trying to establish the relationship between nature and energy and the people around us, like how we perceive the same thing. As you move around this piece, the colors change, and it's also changed by the light. So it's trying to get the idea that even when everybody's in the same place, looking at the same thing, everybody look at from a different angle and see something different. It's the lasers of cutting to the plexiglass. Taking two places is pretty much a decommission, a Philadelphia decommission power plant, and a power grid that brings us different energy into the city. So this is what it's trying to portray in the same venue that the other pieces, is that it's taking places and putting them together, creating a dialogue of relationship. And it's what I always try to do, that having different things and establishing a dialogue to create a perception and everybody perceives in a different way.
Looking at the night sky is really like a universal experience, and there's also something about it that's like looking into the past and looking into the future at the same time. It's a total cliche, like I look at the stars and feel small, but like it's kind of true. Like you have the problems and like the day-to-day and schlepping around, and like to kind of step back and be like, oh, I'm part of this universe, and like I'm part of nature, and like I'm part of this community. With the Nighttime Rainbows pieces that are in the show, I combine them with, instead of celestial imagery where we're on Earth and looking out, it's there from space, kind of looking back down. I think any kind of chance to invite a viewer to kind of step back and like try on a different perspective, even if it's like only in those few minutes where they're looking at the drawing, that's a win in my book. I always love when art and drawing in particular are used to communicate. I tend to not think of work I make as having a mapping process, but it is. Like, maps are taking information, organizing information, sharing that information visually. I consider myself an artist who is really inspired by this history of observation that from the earliest, before humans were even Homo sapiens, this idea of looking at the world and processing that information and then making artwork from it. And that there's this long tradition, and that I am part of that tradition that carries that importance around.
I was studying the urban birds that are thriving on the banks of the Schuylkill River, and the colorful little stripes, those all signify different species of birds. So the saturated ones are the birds that are thriving right now. The ones that are printed on the back of the rice paper that are a little bit more faded or less bright, those birds, due to climate change, have been pushed farther north. And then the ones at the bottom that are closer to the Naval Yard and John Hines, those birds are on the conservation watch list and on the decline. The ones in the other galleries, those are light pollution maps. You'll see the very similar stripe lines, so you'll see the different light pollution maps and how the light pollution is affecting climate change, which then is affecting the health of the avian species. So those two sky domes tie in. One is star cluster, and then the other is Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. Those are the constellation patterns by which the birds migrate. So songbirds, their GPS is the stars, which is pretty amazing. So they all deal with songbirds navigating at night by the stars. For me, it's like being able to share the work with the public is that it's the ultimate, having the exhibition, because then I'm able to connect with, a greater audience, and, maybe they won't see, I'm sure in the beginning, all of the kind of data or the climate change or those kind of moments within the content, but if they would read the title of the piece or click on InLiquid's website and listen to a little snippet of the video, like there might be those little aha moments of like, oh, wow, okay, so through that beauty you can, hook people to potentially, pay attention. I learn a lot from having conversations with the viewers too.
Placemaking and thinking about cities is always present in my work. A lot of the themes are repetition and exploring a fictional cityscape kind of motifs, looking at the cityscape in a more fictional and perceptual way, thinking about line and color and exploring the spaces within the actual pieces. I think about building a city over time. So just kind of like the idea of collage is building over time. and process as being like an urban environment being a process. I've been doing it for a while, this kind of like more fictional cityscapes. I was a figurative painter, and then I actually started drawing and painting from life of cityscapes, like plein air. And then I started doing collages, and this came out of that. Making layers of printmaking, so if there's like a layer and then another layer, and building things over time. And sometimes I'm just adding and adding. Also, color is like definitely a big theme in my work. So yeah, I do want some pieces to only be limited and some pieces to have a more freeing, like let more colors in and kind of go for it. Any screen prints or anything like that is usually based on something I drew in my sketchbook. People have said my work just feels like I pulled things out of my sketchbook and put it in a frame or like glued it on a panel. And I'm like, yep, that's pretty much the freshness of how I make things in general.
There's nothing like seeing a piece in person because it's so different in person. The color, scale, how the work interacts with each other, how the art talks to each other. So there's no comparison to actually seeing the work online versus seeing it in person. And a lot of the work that's being shown here is stuff that just can't be seen anywhere. I mean, it's very large scale work. We can do a lot more site-specific projects. We could actually give artists an opportunity to show work that can't be shown in most galleries or most spaces. So the work isn't just sitting in a gallery, but it's actually part of a public space, which I think is critical, not only for the people interacting with it, but also for the artists. So the artwork is an amenity for the residents, but it's also for the public, which is why the windows are so important. We sort of create this dialogue between the parkway and the galleries. But we also create programming to bring the public continually in. AIR's made this huge investment that other places will see this and embrace it as a model that is very successful. And I think it's very smart of AIR to put their marketing dollars in actually something that benefits the arts community instead of just advertising, because we're continually bringing in new audiences to the space who are learning about this, which creates not only value to AIR, but value to the artwork that's being seen here.